Welcome, everyone. Wave to me so I know you're hearing me. Yay, hey, hello, everyone. I am Elizabeth Lesser. I am Omega Institute's co-founder, and it feels like a real celebration to be with you this evening. I was checking the chat and people are calling, zooming in, Facebooking in from all over the world and the country, just about every state. I saw New Zealand and Australia and Europe and Canada and all the states. So we're probably about 1,000 people strong. So just feel that for a minute. It just feels so great. It feels so good to be with people. And it feels like a celebration to me tonight for a couple of reasons. One, we're celebrating these two beautiful books, the publication of Anne Lamott's book and Neal Allen's book. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. But we're also celebrating the fact that Omega is going to open our campus in July. And we didn't really know for quite a while if we would be able to this summer, if we'd ever be able to. Things had gotten so tough, not just for us, for people everywhere. But our campus has been closed since October 2019, and we will be opening it up really because of people like you who have cheered us on, supported us financially. And I'll be talking later on during the evening about how you still might be able to support us if you'd like to. So let's just jump right in. I just want to make sure people know people are zooming in, people are coming in through Facebook. And so I just want to welcome everybody. We're just so pleased you're here. So let me bring in our guests tonight and get right down to it and introduce our guests. Hi, Annie. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Wonderful to see you. So Anne Lamott, as many of you know, is one of America's most beloved writers. She is the New York Times bestselling author of 18 books and essays, novels, long-form nonfiction, including two of my favorite books, Bird by Bird and Operating Instructions, the fantastic child-rearing memoir. And she is a past recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and an inductee into the California Hall of Fame. And those trees behind her, they're not real trees, are they? Is that a screen?
Cloth trees.
Okay, they're also in the California Hall of Fame, I would imagine, redwoods. And then there's Neal Allen, who is just the most wonderful person and a coach and a writer. And he studies and practices traditional and contemporary spiritual paths. And his private coaching practice blends standard psychodynamics and spirituality methods. And he also is a writer, and his earlier careers included newspaper journalism and corporate marketing. And he and Annie, who are married, live in Northern California. So welcome, you two wonderful friends. Really, thank you for being with us. So, okay, before we get into exploring what's in the books, I just wanted to ask you what this year has been like for you. Fingers crossed, we're coming out of the worst of it, but truly fingers crossed, we don't know. But when you look back on this year, what was it like, especially for two people who had recently gotten married, to be in lockdown for a year? Tell us what your year was like.
It was relatively, compared to other people, I think it was relatively uneventful because we both work at home. We're both, we have an easy time being introverts. We don't have a lot of guests anyway. I mean, missing being able to see my granddaughter, who was 5 months old when I last saw her a week before the lockdown, and I had to wait until last week and saw her at 18 months. That was it. But, you know, one thing I noticed among my clientele was that those who were empty nesters, a lot of them had a guilty sense of this ain't bad because their lives were less busy. They had less commute time. They had fewer events and people around them. And they generally got a couple of hours a day alone with themselves that they normally wouldn't have had. And my sense was they discovered they actually liked themselves, that all that time that they were keeping busy and not being able to spend time to know that, now all of a sudden they were forced to address their own alone time, and they noticed they kind of liked it.
I noticed, I mean, there really wasn't much difference between my life then and now, because I really don't like to leave the house. I mostly stay on the couch and read, or sit on the bed and read, because then the kitty will cuddle with me. But I noticed, we called it COVID college, and it was good to lose those daily rituals and patterns that we get so hooked into. And to just sort of have to reimagine ordinary life, since you couldn't flutter around doing errands and going in places safely, especially the first 6 months or so. And you know, hooray for ordinary not life. That's where every single thing I crave and am nurtured by can be found. I notice in myself and a lot of people, a lot of friends and neighbors too, a kind of renewal, a deepening of compassion, because as Neal said, we did have it so much easier. And what you saw on TV was the endless lines of people at the food pantries just trying to get a sack of food or two for their kids, you know. And I noticed that we were all paying attention to what was right in front of us, which is kind of the basis of Omega, right? Is that you pay attention to what is right in front of you, and with every breath, because there were not nearly so many avenues of escape and distraction and racing around doing things that you just think are just so important, like the white rabbit. There's a lot more of the sacrament of ploppage, and I think that was lovely. And so, yeah.
I mean, it was obviously very different if you had
kids at home, yeah.
Or if you were the age of being in the mating dance, if you're in your 20s or 30s. It
was very, very hard for 90% of the world. And what I did was to try to take care of food pantries, because I thought, God, if you can feed your kids, it's a big step up. I mean, it's such a nightmare to even think about kids going hungry. But I just tried to be there for the newly sober women who came through my recovery meetings, who had kids at home. They'd been sober 6 weeks or whatever, and they were homeschooling, or they had really little ones and just no relief, no break, and no daycare. So, and so there was the heaviness of that, like a dental x-ray apron of what it was like for most people. And then for us, it was being able to pay better attention to the golden crowned sparrows that migrated through in the fall, you know, and those beautiful piping cries of, and the daffodil and everything that we had to and got to pay better attention to. So it was such a mixed grill. And it's funny, just, you know, we were married for 2 years and one of them was in lockdown. So I could write a book about that.
You very well may. You know, some people I've heard had that same experience that you just said, Annie, where they just liked themselves better, discovered that they liked themselves better. But some people had the opposite experience. And I love your new book, Dusk, Night, Dawn. And you say one line that I love so much, that the greatest prayer in the world is, help me not be such an asshole. Mm-hmm. And I have some questions about that. First, who do you pray to when you pray not to be an asshole? And then what does it look like when you are not an asshole, when your prayers are met? And then what does it look like when they're not met?
Wow, well, that's another whole book, but also the fourth part of that prayer is practicing radical self-care and self-love when I am being an asshole, when I'm triggered and I've just gotten to the end of my rope and I'm just harshing people. I don't usually harsh people. I get very quiet, and then I weaponize the quiet. And you can ask my son or husband here. It's very scary and effective. But who do I pray to? Well, I'm a nice Christian girl. I pray to Jesus. He's like kind of my Casper the Friendly Ghost, and I experience him at about that level. It's not a deep or interesting theological experience. I just feel him. I love his mother, Mary, who has even lower standards than he does, and she's who I turn to when I'm really separated from myself, and when I just feel kind of crunchy and rashy. Mary is so great. She appears in the 1500s to a little Mexican Indian boy, and she says, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." And that's who I turn to when I'm afraid of who I am acting like or feeling like. So I pray to the great universal spirit, and I pray to the loving intelligence that's my understanding, such as it is, of God that surrounds us and indwells us and supports us no matter what, a life raft. So that's who I pray to, and all my prayers are answered. Although unfortunately, sometimes the answer is no, but yes, no, maybe, or we'll see. And of course, I always want to get my own way, and very rarely do, because when you get what you pray for, you've usually shortchanged yourself. So I don't have like a Lutheran blue-eyed Jesus in my head, but in my heart and in the sort of acre, my emotional spiritual acre that I stand on, I feel a dark-skinned and very Jewish teacher, the rabbi, and he looks at me like Rembrandt's Christ look, of these dark brown eyes of crazy, reckless, and gentle love. And that's who I turn to. And my usual prayers, just help me. Just help me. And then I usually get the answer. The phone rings, the email comes, I get a text, or I trip and I fall over because I'm racing around being so busy and full of myself. And then that's my answer is, it's usually slow down or stop, honey, just stop where you are. So I sit in the dirt and kind of dust myself off and breathe, and I get my sense of humor back, which is usually what grace looks like.
So Neal, your new book, I love your book. I've been studying it, reading it. It's not like a beach read or whatever that's called. Like it takes some real work to really understand fully what you're talking about. And what I admire about it so much is that, the Buddhist writer, the psychiatrist, Mark Epstein, writes that there's a 2,000-year tradition of not being able to describe what waking up really looks like, because you just start to sound like you're sort of somewhat crazy. So I love how careful you are in this book and how much you are giving us a real method. So tell everyone what the book is about, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, the book focuses on an unusual discovery made by a teacher in Berkeley about 40 years ago, that there are 35 objects, colors that are universal that you can find inside usually your torso or head or your neck with a very simple method that anybody can do. And they represent aspects of God, so that a yellow one represents joy or curiosity. That's an aspect of God. Another that's red represents strength. Another that's white represents will, and so on. They form a kind of complete support system for you that serves two functions. One is it can show you that an emotional issue you have is easily solvable by noticing that you have support for that issue. So each of these kind of metaphoric objects found inside your body relates usually to a sense of deficiency. Most people have either they feel that they are constrained in their curiosity, or they don't have enough strength, or don't have enough willpower. They don't persevere well enough. And we all have these notions about ourselves. And it turns out that the notions are created mainly by our little gremlin, inner critic or superego, and it has a lot of force in our lives. And what these do is allow me to listen to the gremlin's message and then go into my body and notice that I actually do have strength, and I can rise to the occasion, and I'm not actually a lazy guy. I actually am able to get most everything that I try to do done, and that I do have somebody looking out for me, God, whatever, it's the support system of the world that is a kind of counter offer to me from the offer of belittlement that my inner critic gives me. What's trippy about this is that it takes almost nothing to find these things, and they've presumably been around universally within people forever, and they all represent kind of good Christian values, good Buddhist values, the sorts of things that are on the good side of good and bad, the right side of right and wrong. And it's as if we have born within us a rudimentary and simple vocabulary of virtue. And
How do you find them? How do you find these?
I can show you. So let's do it. It's this simple. So
Me do it with you now.
yeah. So
Okay.
Elizabeth, I want you to close your eyes. Take a couple of breaths. Doesn't everything spiritual start with a couple of breaths?
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny, whether it's Hindu or Vedanta Hindu or Vedic or Buddhist or Shinto or anything. Take a couple of breaths, right? And put your feet flat down on the ground, right? And then close your eyes. And I want you to go inside your head, neck, and torso and just look around. You're looking around for anything that is localized, a feeling of warmth, cold, anything that's not gastrointestinal. It might be a tense spot or a smooth spot. And you'll find something. Tell me when you found something.
I found something.
Okay, where is it?
Kind of like in the back of my head.
Okay, so in the back of your head, you found, what can you just give me a quick description? What, like, is it a feeling? What is it back there?
It's kind of like an orange glob.
Okay, so you've got a glob in the back of your head. How wide is this glob?
I can't believe I'm doing this in front of 1,000 people. It's like the entire back of the head.
So like 6 inches wide or so?
Yeah, yeah.
And then the same height, is it 6 inches high, or how tall is it?
More like 4 inches tall.
Okay, so 6 by 4, and then how thick is it front to back?
It's like an oval, like maybe 1 inch thick.
1 inch thick. So it's a slightly flattened oval, 6 by 4 in the back of your head. Is it attached or is it floating?
It's floating.
Is it moving?
No.
It's still. And is it, can you tell what it's made of, what its density? Is it air, water, wood, metal? What's its density?
It's like pudding.
Pudding. Okay, so it's gelatinous. Does it have a skin on it, or is the outside made of the same stuff as the inside?
Same stuff, no skin.
Same stuff. So it's kind of a pudding. And I think you told me it was orange. Can you tell me a little more about the orange?
Oh, it's just a delightful orange color, like a tangerine skin.
Like my
Like
shirt.
your shirt,
Like my
yeah.
shirt. But don't look.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got an oblong object that's 6 by 4 by an inch. That's gelatinous, same on the outside as the inside, and it's a tangerine orange, right? So,
Yeah, I don't think we should go on for like the whole hour doing this.
Yeah, yeah. So let's cut it off right there. The whole
Okay.
point of that is that it doesn't matter what the object is.
That
It's
was so strange. That was so amazing.
Because it's so real, right? Because
Yeah.
you could really feel it.
Yeah, I really
So
could.
This
So what does
takes
that
no
mean?
practice. The only trick to this, the reason this wasn't discovered earlier, I think, is that you can't really do it yourself. You really need somebody asking this series of open-ended questions. How wide is it? How tall is it? How thick is it? Is it still or is it moving? The questions that I ask are none of them lead you, right? All of them leave you open to the discovery of the thing all on your own. I'm not leading you.
And then does it say in the book what these shapes and colors signify?
Yeah, usually the first object that appears is a representation of an emotional burden that you believe you have that day. And that object isn't actually one of the universal objects, right? So it's not one of the 35. It's actually the thing in the way of your believing that you are made up of the 35. And so what you do is you spend some time, once you've described it, just like you described yours, all you do is look at it. And after anywhere from 5 minutes to a half an hour, depending on how big an emotional burden it might be to you, it'll disappear. And at that point, there's always a feeling of great contentment. It's actually the feeling that's described in Buddhism as equanimity, right? That kind of satisfaction that's a full self-satisfaction that doesn't have a particular high or low. It's not a bliss state, but it's also got no negativity to it. And you're just kind of content. And
I just want to tell everybody that that was like absolutely something anyone can do, because I don't usually do things like that. So that came as a total surprise that I had an orange glob in the back of my head. And I can't wait to go into the book now when we're done and read up more on the color and the shape. And
there's a catalog at the back of all of everything that anything might mean. It's a catalog of the colors, and you can just look up later. I love that you found a tangerine, because it's actually one of my very favorite colors in the world. But I have found, maybe it's because I'm like not as well as you, but I find like gray brown blobs and spills and puddles. And but the thing is that if you have a friend who'll do it with you, the question would keep being, what is it doing now? Has it changed? Is it moving? Is the color changing? And 100% of the time, the color changes and shifts. And I've seen Neal do this a dozen times with people, not with his clients, obviously, but with people, guests or people at dinner.
Parlor trick.
He calls it a parlor trick, but it's so profound. I mean, it puts me in touch with something so that might have been so troubling or so isolating, and it changes into something illuminating. And but I've always seen people at the end just start to laugh. When they're done, they come out and they just start to laugh at how trippy it was, and simultaneously how real the shape and the color felt while they were in process.
So I learned
go ahead. People are putting in the chat who came in late. So we're talking about Neal's book, Shapes of Truth. Yeah.
So these were discovered by a guy in Berkeley, as I said, who writes as A.H. Almaas, and he's got a kind of a mystery school, a modern New Age mystery school in Berkeley and Boulder primarily, called Diamond Heart or Diamond Approach. And what I've done with the book is taken this piece of Diamond Heart out of the mystery school, because what I discovered with my clients was you don't even have to have a spiritual practice at all to find these useful at working with your inner critic in particular. And that I come from a totally rationalistic, non-spiritual East Coast family, and my my relatives on the East Coast enjoy doing this, and they have the exact same experience as the most woo-woo of my friends out here in California do.
We have our share of woo-woo people here.
Yes, you do now, especially nowadays in the Hudson Valley. Yes.
So I wanted to ask you both a question. So in Dusk, Night, Dawn, what is that?
It's not me, Mom.
Time's up.
No,
Wow.
no.
That was strange.
I've talked too much.
Yeah, usually
No,
there's a
That
signal
meant
that,
something about something. Okay,
Okay.
so you write in the book, Annie, that 90% of the time, telling the truth is the solution. Tell it. And you're talking about relationships here with your mate, with your friends, with your kids or your colleagues. And I actually, at one point, was writing a book, and I was going to call it Tell It, because I was exploring that idea. And just as I started writing the book, my sister got very sick with cancer, and I found out that I was her match, and I was her bone marrow transplant match. And before we went through that process, we decided we would clean up our relationships. So, because maybe if we created this like field of love in our bodies, it would work better. And once again, I had this miraculous experience. Like, it's like we're so dumb. Like, I had to learn the hard way with her getting cancer, that when we told each other our truths, things we hadn't told each other our whole life as sisters, as loving sisters, like our relationship just blossomed and became so much more beautiful. So how do the two of you work with becoming better tellers of truth? Because it's scary sometimes, and better listeners. And how can we do that better?
I think partly you decide to be a truth teller, and also in recovery, I got sober 35 years ago, nearly, and I always heard the willingness comes from the pain, and then the healing comes from the spiritual actions you take, usually radical self-love, usually getting yourself a cup of tea or drawing a hot bath or telling someone. But the pain of keeping secrets and of the rashy, crunchy feeling of holding resentments or of blame, which is kind of my default place, is to figure out whose fault my discomfort is, and then to try to manipulate them into changing their behavior so I can be more comfortable. That makes me just miserable, makes my heart closed or colder, makes my mind rashy, and I call it, it's like rubber band worms in my mind when I'm having bad secrets or uncomfortable secrets. And it's usually at that point that gives me the willingness. I don't usually just feel like being honest and clearing things up, cleaning up my own emotional acre. But if I have boxed myself in, the willingness, I get the willingness. And it's very hard and scary to tell the truth, because who of us were raised to tell the truth? I wasn't. My father was the child of Presbyterian missionaries in Tokyo, and my mother's from Liverpool, so neither of those cultures is big on kids, especially sharing their feelings, their pain, their anger. In the 50s and early 60s, you shared any of those at the dinner table and you went to your room without eating. So for me to tell a scary truth takes a lot of courage, but courage is fear that has said its prayer. So I pray to be able to to blurt is the way home, that you blurt out one sentence and then you're kind of doomed anyway, because then the person's heard this thing that you are resenting them, or you're troubled by something between the two of you. And then, what, it happens pretty organically. I think, though, the intention to heal, the intention to live toward wholeness, to be asking yourself how alive you're willing to be, is what gives you ultimately gives you the courage to start telling, like what you did with your sister is so beautiful, but you didn't do it until she was really boxed into a corner. And then you had the willingness, because it was life or death, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
And it gets easier with age, so that I notice, particularly in hospice work, that and in general with people, as you get older, you just realize everybody's ashamed of the exact same things, and who cares, right? And who cares whether people know it's certainly easier for people to know than for me to spend all my time propping up a self-image. And so oddly, when Annie and I were first dating, we ended up, I don't think we intended to do it, but we ended up, for a short while, we had a kind of ritual of while watching TV, hitting the pause button and blurting out something I was ashamed of, and then no comment, then hitting it again and watching for a while, and then Annie would blurt out something she was ashamed of. And what happens is, after a while, when you've kind of gone through all of your secrets and all of your shames or whatever, that very vulnerability becomes my superpower, right? Because since I'm not scared of being vulnerable, errors that would hurt my feelings or that would be dangerous to me can pass through a heck of a lot more quickly, right? And it turns out that as human beings, our vulnerability is really helpful. It helps us achieve compassion and empathy and all sorts of things.
So
And he's able to use all of my secrets now against me on a daily basis.
Yeah, and as material.
Yeah, and as material in your books, and
So it was you two who said to me, "Hey, let's use tonight as a chance to maybe raise some money for Omega." And I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you have come and given your services here tonight for free, and that you might want to help me make a little pitch. But I just want to say that as we stabilize at Omega, the thing we're the most excited and hopeful about is that we can refill our scholarship coffers, because it's been one of Omega's superpowers, is that we have created such diversity on our campus of means and of backgrounds and of ages, by helping people who can't afford what Omega does, healing and community and awakening and activism, by our scholarship program. So we are hoping that if any of you feel so drawn to help support us, get our feet back on the ground so we can be who we were meant to be, we would appreciate it. So Annie, you want to say anything?
So, yeah. I mean, we can donate 50 right now, and it would be great if you could get a show of hands of people who can match us. And I'm not allowed to have my phone right now because I was creating feedback, but I would do it right now. And some people listening might be able to donate 3, and some people 100, and some people 17. But you just think of, the heartbreaking image of food pantries, of people lining up to nourish those they love and themselves to keep on going. Is there are many kinds of food, and maybe to me the most important is the spiritual food, and people disseminating spiritual truth and information and comfort and direction and dessert cake, spiritual cake. And so, sometimes we put the word out. I go to a little failing church called St. Andrew, and every couple of years I do a fundraiser on Facebook, and I ask people to send us whatever they can for scholarship, for mentoring, for the electricity. And sometimes we'll get big shows of support, which is great. But we'll also get envelopes with $3 in them, and those are the ones that bring us to tears. It's like the woman in the Old Testament in the Hebrew Bible with a few pennies to add to the work, because it really was she really felt the pinch. And so if people could raise their hands in the chat or just say a word that they're in, it would be so great if we could raise this money to let people get to Omega who otherwise would not be able to, so that people that can pay can come, and that just as equally, people for whom it might be a bit of a hardship, especially this crazy year, could also come, and that we can be as one, sharing what we know, looking into each other's eyes, breathing the fresh air, and lurching ever forward together. So
Thank
we're
you.
good for 50. Yeah. So
Thank you. Wow. That was very touching. Thank you. Whew. Also, everyone, I wanted to say that, first of all, thank you. And if you want to buy Annie's book and Neal's book, you can buy them, of course, wherever books are sold. But we always love to do a pitch for your local bookstore, either showing up there, or local bookstores have gotten really good at mail order now. Our local bookstore in Rhinebeck, New York is Oblong Bookstore. And they're just as fast as Amazon, I promise you. So we're putting in the chat how to order from Oblong, but you can order their books from anyone.
mhm.
Okay, so before I open it up to Q&A, and when I open it up, you just put your questions in the chat, and that's the way we're going to take your questions. And you can start doing that now if you'd like. But I want to ask you a question, both of you, Annie and Neal. So, Annie, you write in your book that Yeats, he cried out in 1919, "The center cannot hold." It was a terrible time in history then, too. And you write, "Yes, these are times of great illness and distress, yet the center may just hold." So, talk about these times. Lay some wisdom on us, both of you, about these times. How do we relate to them? How do we be beacons of hope and holding in these times?
Well, I've said that lighthouses don't go running all over their island looking for boats to save. They are where they are, and they try to give off a little light. And I think that that's ultimately what we do. It's certainly the message of recovery, that if you're sober, or you're recovering from gambling or sex addiction, or your tiny control issues or whatever, the Al-Anon people, that you start little by little giving off a little light as you allow yourself to be the bulb and the glass to be cleansed of illusion and resentment and schmutz, the general schmutz of life, because life is messy. And so you first of all can just look at your own your interiors, and notice that you are grudgy, or that you're holding resentments, or that you're scared all the time of this or that. And you can start to get the help you need, whether it be from a rabbi or teacher, minister, an imam, a therapist, whatever. You just get the help that you can shine a little bit brighter. And then people see it. People see that you're giving off light. You're giving off a little bit of warmth. They can maybe begin to warm their hands on you. And but I wrote this book. My last book was on hope, and I was traveling around the country 3 years ago, talking to to groups about hope, and people didn't feel hopeful because Trump was president. And I certainly don't mean to insult the many, many Tea Party people who flocked to Omega, but the people that tend to like my work were just stunned by the political reality and the global reality and the nightmare of global warming. The UN climate change papers had just come out. And so the book, Dusk, Night, Dawn, really began as a book to address that. It was sort of based on Gabriel Garcia Marquez's great novel, Love in the Time of Cholera. But our cholera, to me, to my tiny princess self, was Trump and climate change, and then COVID. And it's devastating business. And you can't just, hand people nice Christian bumper stickers. You need to say, this is really hard, but we're good at hard. And so these are some of the things I do. I support food pantries. I go out in nature every day, which is the great outdoors, which spells God. And grace over drama. I do the work on myself to be a little bit more graceful than I might be. And really, the whole book is about how, and you, I'm very moved every time I say this by Mr. Rogers' mother when he was a little boy, and he was scared to death by the tragedies around him and the deprivation. And she said, "Look to the helpers." And if you look to who's helping and who has rushed in, whether it's nurses or EMTs or the people manning food pantries or free clinics, you're going to see the face of the divine, if that's your intention. And so that's what would you say, Neal?
I mean, I'll take a very different look at it, which is that starting in about 1980, we shifted our political system away from a balance between compassion and self-interest, and we moved heavily down the self-interest side, the individual liberty in terms of being able to hoard wealth side. And that's had predictable consequences, and let's hope it's bottomed out. It certainly looks like we're moving back toward bringing compassion back into politics, but for a long time it was just left out. And what happens is things get bad when you move down a kind of self-interest spiral. It's funny, I spent a little bit of the pandemic studying Eastern classics in a program at my alma mater, and we read a lot of early ancient Chinese history, as well as Confucian texts. And whatever you think of, autocratic dynasties, the Confucian both philosophy and political system was adamant in presenting a balance between strength and compassion, and unembarrassedly uses the term Ren, which means compassion, as half of what is required of a good dynasty. And there were good dynasties, albeit autocratic. Well, we don't have the word compassion in our politics whatsoever. It just doesn't appear. Even when FDR was introducing it, he couldn't. We're so individually oriented, we can't even mention the word in a way. I think that's going to change once we bottom out.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. All right, we have a lot of questions. People with your hands up, we're doing this through the chat. So if you can put your questions in the chat, that would be helpful. And we're going to try to get to as many as we can. So I have a question for Annie. What books have changed your life?
What books have changed my life?
Yeah.
Oh boy, books changed my life. As chapter books, when I was a little girl, I was an early reader. And so by 5 years old, I discovered that I could drop down from a sort of scary family into a world that had been created on these two-dimensional flat pages, into which I could get completely lost, and then in that way completely found. And so when I found chapter books, I was halfway home. But then spiritually, when I found when I was probably 12 or 13 and people started foisting poetry at me, it was just Yeats. I always loved. I loved E.E. Cummings. I loved the poets my dad loved and my mom loved. And then there was Denise Levertov, and then there was Audrey and Rich, and then there were the spiritual memoirs of Yogananda and Thomas Merton's Six Story Mountain, and then Ram Dass, and then and those books all changed my life completely, and it's funny though, I can never really think of the titles of books when anybody asks for it.
I know.
But right off the top of my head, those are some that really, really changed my life.
So, Neal, Helene asked, are those colors that you're talking about, are they somehow related to chakras?
No, they're not. They don't line up with what's interesting is we looked, both Almas and myself, we kind of looked for any cognates or anything these were related to, but they're more elemental. The chakra system, the colors, by the way, are fairly recent in the chakra system. I think late 19th century they started to show up. They weren't originally in them, but that the colors in the chakra system are describing more of a path, and of the whole chakra system is more of a path, like the tree of life tends to take you on a path. That would be the other obvious cognate, but these don't actually associate with each other as levels or movement from one toward another. And so not only do they, are they probably a little more fundamental, but also they don't organize themselves well into a system.
I'm noticing in the chat several people writing about their grief. They've lost someone dear to COVID, or they've lost their job, and there's just so much grief in the field. How do you, Annie, and you, Neal, deal with your own grief and help others deal with great loss and sorrow?
Well, you know, I think every book I've written has actually been about great loss and sorrow. My first novel, I've actually written 19 books now, and my first novel was called Hard Laughter, that I published at a very young age after my father's death from brain cancer. That was actually a melanoma. And there, you didn't, at 1980, and my dad was sick in the late 70s, you did not talk death or cancer or loss. It was considered unseemly. It was kind of a buzzkill. So when my dad got so sick, I have two brothers, there was we didn't have anywhere to turn. And I started looking for books. That's what I've always done. And I couldn't find any. I found one. And hospice had just started coming out. And you could talk with hospice people about death, and they would sit with you and you could ask them things. And if you didn't know what to do, they would say, how could you know? And they made it possible for us to begin to talk about it. And ever since, I have just not shied away from death and dying and sorrow and grief, because I believe crying and grief and anger are the way home. And that our suppression of those things is why people feel so defeated and clenched up and like they're frauds, because they have not been given permission to cry and to be bathed in their tears and hydrated and baptized. And so I do what I've always done, which is I show up. You know, it's like before I turned on Woody Allen and he said that 80% of life is just showing up. I show up and I listen. And I listen because people have trusted me when they're dying or when their closest person is dying, and I learned to listen. It's like learning to play the piano. You learn to stop talking as much and you listen and you nod and you don't run for your cute little life, and you help people feel safe to cry.
And then personally, when I had in 2012, I think, a great teacher of mine who I first went to as a therapist, and then he kind of took me on a spiritual rocket ride, an Osho guide, who, if there are any Osho people on, this is Swami Prem Amitabh. He was Bob Birnbaum to me. When he died, my anguish didn't stop. And after a while of kind of spontaneous crying, and it didn't happen all the time, but every once in a while, after about 6 months of it, I just thought to myself, there's something wrong with this picture. I don't know what's going on here, and I devoted myself to being around dying people from that point on, until I could kind of start to feel for myself by being around dying people, that I could start to understand what loss is and how ordinary it is and how real it is. My dad died around the same time, and my dog died around the same time. So all of those I just watched closely and paid a lot of attention to. It was actually something that was very attractive when I met Annie, was that Annie's always got people who are close to death around her. And we discovered that we both kind of casually liked to be near it and talk about it, in the sense that I'm not saying there's something glorious or beautiful about death. It's just that Montaigne was right, that to free yourself from the fear that is part of the anguish and part of the grief, that's the personal fear, at least that part, get close to it. spend your time. I mean, he suggested you go to battlegrounds and
Mm-hmm.
look at the bodies on battlegrounds. You can't really do that nowadays, but
No,
you
but
can-
we've all just done a lot of it because we've been in a global pandemic of loss. And perhaps one of the quote unquote silver linings is that, we've kept grief under wraps so much. You're supposed to you get one day off from work if your mother dies, or you're supposed to closure, my least favorite word. And I think there can't be closure now, really. We have to sit in the group wound. And I think that's where the compassion may spring from, that we feel each other's pain.
Can I add one quick thing, which is that
please.
The culture tells you that there's sort of a grid, and that if you need to get over this, the goal of the culture is to get you over the grief, because it makes you very inefficient and kind of a mess, a soppy mess. And I don't believe you ever get over some of the losses, that your heart is broken. And famously, Leonard Cohen said there's cracks in everything. That's how the light gets in. But Carly Simon said there's more room in a broken heart. And there are a couple of deaths I haven't gotten over and have no intention of getting over, because if my heart is still a little open, crack, and it has a bit of a crack, I can really feel them. And so I've been able to share with people that the grid is bullshit, that you don't get over a spouse in 18 months, or a brother in 3 to 6 months, or a best friend in 6 to 9 months, whatever the grid is. You really are not supposed to get over. That's the great palace lie, that when people die, they in certain ways come back fully alive, and may their memory be a blessing. And it's very mixed grill. It's so hard not to reach people by phone anymore, and it's so wonderful to feel this kind of purity inside of you where they still live. So I think what Neal as a hospice volunteer, and me as just whatever I am, have been able to say, you really don't have to get over this. And if you want to cry 3 years later, I'll just sit here with you, and I'm hold some space for you while you grieve. So
There's been a couple of questions about the rift in the country, and how do you talk to someone who you're vaccinated, they refuse to be vaccinated, political rifts. Is this something that we can bridge, we should bridge? How do you hold that?
I just try to hold politics slightly lightly, because it's not my intimate world, right? My intimate world is the person who's right next to me, and they're not a political figure. They're not a political person. They're whoever I'm with. But
at the same time, for 40 years, we were both enraged.
Yeah.
Now, we had met about 2 months before the election of 2016, and he came home from somewhere in the East Bay that night when the New York Times needle had begun to swing away from Hillary. And we've been enraged. We were enraged. We were and grief struck and stunned. And every day we watch Rachel Maddow every night. So it's not like we're not plugged in. And he went to marches earlier than I did. He was braver, and he marched with the very old people in the back of the line. And I'm an activist and it's very, very important to me. It's such a part of who I am. But there's a wonderful book by our friend Arlie Hochschild called Strangers in Their Own Land. And when Bush was elected, I foisted it on everybody, because Arlie, and when Trump was elected, same with when Bush. I wrote a whole book about trying to bear up under Bush. It was called Plan B. It was trying to be a spiritual person under Bush Cheney. But anyway, that was years ago. But Arlie Hochschild lives in the sociological bubble of UC Berkeley, and all of the people she loves are us, and we're all progressives. And she wrote this beautiful book about going to the bayou and going to the outlying the counties in the very, very poor areas of the Deep South, and getting to know the people who were so passionately on the side of Trump, and who felt that he was their friend and that what we were trying to do was to destroy the country. And they listened to her, and she listened to them, and she ate with them, and she went to church with them, although she's not a believer. And she sat on the porch with them, and they brought her iced tea, and it's such a beautiful, profound book, because we're all strangers in the strange land. And I thought it was the most healing book that's been published in the last 5 years.
I think that's what you kind of were getting at, Neal, that like it's person to person. That's where the healing happens, whether it's your beloved wife or husband or a person you don't agree with, that you humanize each other. That's our great hope.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to say anything about that, Neal?
I just wanted to go on a little about Arlie's book, that she noticed, she came up with a theory, and the theory was very simple, and I think it holds true, which is that the resentment of the white lower class is that on TV and in the political discourse, they believe that there are people who are cutting in front of them, and they associate that with African Americans and with Mexican Americans. And while it's not true, right, the welfare system and the other systems of so-called entitlements are just as available, it doesn't look that way. It looked like they were left out of the political conversation, and they didn't want people cutting in front of them. It's it's kind of fascinating, and it, no single sociological study actually ever solves or points out all of the truth, but it was an interesting view that holds.
So that book is by Arlie Hochschild, and it's called Strangers in a Strange Land.
It's Hochs Childs. But what she did was listen and not try to correct them and say, no, you've got that wrong. No, no one could be more destructive to your children's future than she didn't. She listened, and she looked them in the eye, and they looked her in the eye, and they got each other tea.
And the other thing is that, you look at the title, and just about everything difficult in our lives is related to the fact that because we live next door to strangers, whether we're in a nice suburb or not, whether people look exactly the same as us or not, right? We still are living next door to strangers, which means we are always defaulting to distrust. And that's just, it's just a weird problem of civilization, and nobody really kind of has any ability to figure out their way out of it. I mean, we've had thousands of years to figure out our way to move from distrust to trust, and we haven't figured it out.
Okay, well, we're 2 minutes from 9 o'clock, so I'm just wondering if either of you would like to, or both of you, say a goodbye to our community of fellow travelers here.
Well, I always end up quoting the great poem by William Blake, who said that we are here to learn to endure the beams of love. And I think I live by that. It's hard to believe that we are so beautiful and perfect, and that it's okay to be exactly who we are at any given time, and to endure that people love us as is. That's what I always say to my Sunday school kids. This is as is. God loves, period. That's my understanding. And so these organizations like Omega, Omega's unique, but a group of teachers and administrators and regular old people who gather together to learn to be healed of their distrust or their feeling, that they're defective, which is the message they got at childhood, or the other message they got at childhood, that they're responsible and in charge or trying to help everybody feel better, to begin to show up and be available for that healing. I just give everybody so much credit for being here. And also, we just are so honored. When you said we could do this with you, Elizabeth, we literally looked at each other and cheered.
Oh, thank you, Annie. Thank you, Neal. Neal, you wanna say your goodbye?
I loved that you used the term fellow travelers. That's my favorite term. It's got that little subversive 1930s commie kind of feel to it also. We're a little subversive here, but we're subversive in the way that everything ultimately descends to either a field of truth or a field of love or a field of both. And I love that Omega is full of different viewpoints that all converge on a deep felt love and truth.
Thank you, both of you. And thank you, my fellow travelers, for joining us tonight. I hope we see you at Omega this summer or on more of these virtual experiences. And I just send blessings of healing and love to everybody.
Thank you, Omega.